Hello everyone, welcome to Love Wave's story. I found out who my husband really was because his friend thought I already knew. And even now that detail makes my hands shake, because that day started completely normal. Just a random Tuesday, no drama, no suspicion. I stopped for coffee near my office and ran into Evan, my husband's closest friend since college. We hugged, talked about work, joked about getting older. Everything felt safe and familiar, until he casually asked, "So, how are you holding up with all of that?" I smiled automatically and said, "With all of what?" And something in his face changed. Not panic, not shock, just this quiet freeze. His eyes dropped to my cup and then back to me, like he was calculating how badly he'd messed up. "You know," he said carefully, "everything from before, the whole situation." And my heart started pounding so hard I could hear it. I laughed again because that's what I do when something feels wrong but I'm not ready to face it. So I said he must be confusing me with someone else. That's when he swallowed hard and said, "Oh, wow, I really thought Mark told you." Told me what? That question screamed in my head, because we'd been married 7 years, no secrets, no hidden phones, no strange behavior. Mark was predictable, calm, boring in the best way, the kind of man everyone trusted. Then Evan leaned closer and lowered his voice and said, "I assumed you knew about his other name." My body went cold. I asked what he meant, and the cafe noise faded like someone turned the world down. Evan started talking faster, trying to take it back, but it was too late. Back then, he muttered, he wasn't even Mark, not legally, and I stared at him waiting for a joke that never came, realizing my husband had another name, another life, and an entire past everyone knew about except me. I could tell Evan immediately regretted opening his mouth. He tried to laugh it off, saying it was old stuff and I shouldn't worry, but the way he avoided my eyes told me this wasn't small or harmless. I asked him to explain, calmly at first, because part of me still believed there had to be a reasonable answer, something boring and logical, but Evan shook his head and said, "I really shouldn't be the one telling you this," and that sentence hit harder than anything else, because it meant there was something they had all agreed to hide from me. He admitted that when Mark moved to our city, he didn't just change jobs, he changed his entire identity, not in some dramatic criminal way, but carefully, intentionally, cutting off people, erasing parts of his past, completely abandoning his old name. And according to Evan, it wasn't because Mark was running from the law, he was running from who he used to be. I stood there holding my coffee, nodding like I understood, while my brain screamed, because this was the man I shared a bed with, planned a future with, trusted completely, and somehow everyone else knew there was a version of him I'd never met. Evan said Mark always planned to tell me when the time was right, and that phrase made something snap inside me, because 7 years of marriage felt like plenty of time. So I asked what exactly Mark was hiding, and Evan hesitated before saying, "It's not one thing. It's a pattern," and that scared me more than any single secret ever could. After Evan said that, there was this heavy silence between us, the kind that makes your skin itch, and I realized I didn't want details from him anymore. Not like that, not in a coffee shop with strangers around us, so I thanked him, even though my voice sounded strange to my own ears, and I walked out before he could stop me. The entire drive home I kept telling myself not to overreact, that maybe this was being blown out of proportion, but every memory started rearranging itself in my head, little moments I had ignored, like how Mark never talked about his childhood, how he avoided old photos, how no one from before ever showed up at our wedding. When I got home, Mark was already there, sitting on the couch like any other evening, calm, relaxed, asking how my day was, and for a second I almost believed everything was fine, but then I looked at him and all I could see was a man with a carefully edited life. I asked him, casually at first, if he'd ever used another name, and the pause before he answered was barely a second, but it was enough. His smile tightened as he said no, that he didn't know what I was talking about, and that lie, delivered so smoothly, hurt more than any truth Evan could have told me. I didn't push right away, I just nodded and went to the kitchen, but inside something shifted, because I realized this wasn't about a past mistake, it was about control, about choosing what parts of himself I was allowed to know. That night, lying next to him in bed, listening to his breathing, I understood something terrifying. The man I married knew exactly how to look honest while hiding entire chapters of his life, and I was finally ready to find out why. The next morning I didn't confront him, I watched him, which felt worse somehow, noticing how confident he was in his routines, how easily he moved through our life like everything was solid and earned. And I realized he had no idea that the version of him I believed in was already gone. After he left for work, I did something I had never done before in our marriage. I opened the old storage box in the closet where he kept paperwork he claimed was boring and irrelevant. And for years I had respected that boundary without question. Inside were documents that didn't match, certificates with dates that didn't line up, an old lease under a different first name, and seeing that name in ink made my stomach drop, because it wasn't a nickname or a typo, it was a completely different person. I sat on the floor reading everything slowly, realizing this wasn't impulsive or messy, it was planned, years of consistency, years of practice, and suddenly I understood what Evan meant by a pattern. Mark hadn't just hidden his past, he had rebuilt himself piece by piece, deciding what was acceptable, what was safer, what version of himself could be loved. When he came home that evening and kissed me like nothing had changed, I felt this strange mix of anger and grief, because part of me still loved him, but another part finally saw how little choice I'd been given. I asked him again, more directly this time, if there was anything about his past he hadn't told me, and he smiled, touched my hand, and said, "There's nothing important you don't already know." And in that moment I realized he truly believed that deciding for me made it okay. I didn't argue with him after that, which seemed to confuse him more than anger would have. Because instead of pushing, I started asking questions in a softer way, about timelines, about old friends, about places he'd lived. And every answer lined up just enough to sound reasonable while still avoiding anything real. That's when I understood this wasn't panic lying, it was rehearsed, like he'd practiced these conversations long before I ever existed in his life. That night, after he fell asleep, I went through his laptop for the first time, not digging wildly, just searching that other name I'd seen on the documents. And what came up wasn't criminal or scandalous, it was worse, old articles, archived forum posts, comments written by someone who sounded nothing like the man I married. He had once been publicly known for something he now pretended never happened, not a crime, not cheating, but a role, a public identity that came with strong opinions, backlash, and consequences. And at some point he decided the easiest solution wasn't growth or accountability, it was erasure. He didn't correct his past, he escaped it. I sat there in the dark realizing he hadn't lied to survive, he'd lied to be comfortable, to be accepted without questions, and the most painful part was understanding why he never told me, because if I knew who he used to be, I might have chosen differently, and he couldn't risk giving me that choice. The more I learned, the harder it became to look at him the same way, because every kind gesture now felt layered with intention, like I was married to someone who had studied how to be trusted. I started noticing how carefully he avoided certain topics online, how he never shared opinions publicly, how he coached me to keep our life simple and private, and I realized privacy had always meant protection for him, not for us. A few days later I asked him directly why he changed his name, not accusing, not yelling, just asking, and this time he didn't deny it, he went quiet and said he was trying to be a better man, that his past self had hurt people emotionally. Not illegally, but publicly, and he didn't want that version defining his future. I asked why I wasn't included in that truth, and he said something that still echoes in my head, he said, "Because you fell in love with who I am now, not who I was," as if love automatically erased context. In that moment I understood he believed honesty was optional as long as the outcome was good, and that scared me more than his past ever could, because it meant he would always decide what I was allowed to know if he thought it was for my own good. After that conversation, our house felt different, like the walls had absorbed everything that had been said and were holding it against us, and even though he acted normal, cooking dinner, asking about my day, I could feel the gap growing. I started imagining every big moment of our relationship with this new information layered over it, our first date, our wedding, the promises we made, and I couldn't stop wondering how much of it had been built on a version of him that was carefully curated for me. I asked myself if I would have married him if I'd known the full truth, and the fact that I couldn't answer that immediately told me everything. He kept saying he didn't lie about who he was inside, only about his past, but to me that distinction felt convenient, because your past shapes how you think, how you choose, how you justify things. I realized I wasn't just grieving the man he used to be. I was grieving the honesty I thought our marriage was built on. And the scariest part was recognizing that he still didn't fully understand why that mattered to me. A week later, Evan texted me to apologize again, saying he never meant to hurt me, and I almost didn't reply, but I asked him one question instead, whether Mark had ever planned to tell me the full truth, and his answer was slow and careful. He said Mark talked about it in theory, but every year there was a new reason to wait, a promotion, a move, a milestone, until waiting became permanent. That confirmed what I already knew, that if I hadn't found out by accident, I might never have known at all. When I confronted Mark with that, he didn't deny it, he just said he was afraid of losing me, afraid of being judged forever for something he believed he had outgrown, and for the first time I saw him not as manipulative or evil, but as deeply human and deeply flawed. Still, fear doesn't excuse taking someone's choice away, and loving someone doesn't mean you get to decide their reality for them. I'm sharing this because I didn't leave immediately and I didn't stay blindly either. I took space, I asked for therapy, and I demanded full honesty for the first time in our marriage, because trust isn't about perfection, it's about consent to the truth. Some days I believe we can rebuild something real, other days I wonder if love that starts with omission can ever feel safe again. And I know many of you listening have faced moments where the person you loved turned out to be more complicated than you were prepared for. If this story made you feel something, if it made you question where honesty ends and protection begins, please share your thoughts in the comments, I truly read them. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. And thank you for being here and listening to mine.